One of my favorite effects inside of Illustrator is the 3D effect. There's actually two main 3D effects. One of them is called extrude, and one of them is called revolve. The extrude effect basically allows you to start off with a two-dimensional object and then extend that object back into space, whereas opposed to the other effect, the 3D revolve effect, that allows you to take a regular shape or a profile of a shape and then revolve it around an axis to create a 3D shape. Other people refer to that also as lathing. Let's first take a look at the extrude effect inside of Illustrator. I have this file that I'm working on. It's called 3D Extrude. Again, you'll find it in Chapter 14 of your exercise files. I'm going to go ahead and select this top shape right here. And it's important to realize that when you're working with 3D, that you do not have a stroke applied to your object. And we'll talk more about this as we get more into detail about the 3D effect. But for the most part, the way that Illustrator works is that it takes your fill and it actually extrudes that fill. If you also have a stroke, it actually extrudes the fill and the stroke. But since the stroke is on the outside of the object, the stroke covers up the fill. So you don't end up with a result that is necessarily the one that you'll be looking for. More importantly, it makes Illustrator work twice as hard. So as we'll soon see in a minute, there are certain cases where adding a stroke would be beneficial to you. But for now, I'm going to start off with a shape that has a fill, but that does not have any stroke attribute applied to it. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of move my page over to the side a little bit. And I'm going to select this object right here, choose Effect, choose 3D, and then choose Extrude and Bevel. So I'm going to go ahead and move this dialog box here. When you open up this dialog box, when you click on the preview button, you're able to see a 3D version of your artwork. Basically, you have a cube that appears inside of this user interface. And this cube is almost like a trackball. If you click on it and start to drag, you will see the 3D representation of that artwork appear on your screen. Illustrator manages all the shading for you. In fact, what you're seeing right now is real 3D inside of Illustrator, and again, from a vector standpoint. If you click on the button here called More Options, you'll see that you have the ability to change the surface options or the lighting settings. For example, right now there's light hitting the particular object from the top right. But you can actually change that. Here's a little tip. Inside of Illustrator, if you hold down the Shift key while working with any of the commands inside of the 3D dialog box, that effect actually updates in real time. So I'm holding the Shift key down on my keyboard, and I'll click this light around so you can see that I'm actually changing the lighting settings. See how it gets kind of lighter towards the bottom? Now I'm lighting it from the bottom. Now I'm lighting it from the top. So you can really choose how you want to light your object. Illustrator also supports the ability to have multiple lights. I can choose here to add another light and then adjust certain areas. I can make certain areas more bright than others. But I'm going to go ahead and maybe remove one of these lights and just bring one just back to the regular default setting. You could also choose a custom rotation setting. For example, what does this object look like off axis from the right? Or off axis maybe from the bottom? So on and so forth. If you choose one of these options which are direct, for example, back, well, this is what that artwork looks like directly from the back, so you don't really see the extruded area. I'm going to choose the off-axis front, which is the default setting for 3D. Now, the extrude depth basically allows you to determine how far back into space that object is extended. If I hold down the Shift key again, as I drag this slider, I can see that happening in real time. Pretty cool. There's also a setting here for perspective, which basically makes it appear as if I have a camera lens that's getting really close to the object or further away, which provides some natural distortion. Again, if I hold the Shift key down, I'll be able to see the kind of distortion that's happening to that particular graphic. You'll notice that if I click OK for a second here, what happens is that I have this particular effect, which is a regular 2D shape that now is extruded back into space. If you want to think about it, it's like I took a body here, somewhat distorted it, sent another copy of it to the back, and then connected them all with straight lines. Well, there's a setting inside of Illustrator called the bevel. The bevel allows me to connect the front and the back with, instead of a straight line, with some other kind of line. For example, if I click on this shape right now, notice, by the way, if I go into outline mode, this is the way that the effects work. If you remember in the past, we learned that the effects don't change the underlying vector object. They only affect the appearance of that particular object. So the appearance of this object is 3D. To edit that particular effect, I'll go to the Appearance panel and click on the 3D Extrude and Bevel setting. We'll click Preview here. If I choose bevel, for example, a complex bevel like this one here, and I click OK, we can now see that the connecting area between the front and the back has changed somewhat, so that I get an effect that looks like that. There's lots of cool things you can do with bevels inside of Illustrator. Let me go back here to this setting, though. You may want to experiment also with different lighting settings as you apply these 3D effects. I'm going to change the bevel setting to be back to none, and show you that there are a few other things that you could do with the cube that appears right over here. Notice that when I mouse over certain parts of the cube, they highlight. For example, it's highlighting here in blue, or in green, or in red. These colors match up to the indicators that appear here as well. So if I want to rotate this on a specific axis, I can click over here, and now when I move it, it only rotates on that particular axis. If I click on this edge over here, the cube can only rotate on that axis and not in any other direction. So if I get the artwork to look in a certain way that I want to, I could then fine-tune that by choosing to rotate the object only on one specific axis. Once I've gotten the 3D look that I'm looking for, I can click OK, and that's how you apply a 3D extrude effect inside of Illustrator. But it's important to realize that live effects can be applied to text just as well as they can be applied to other objects. For example, here I have this word surfing. If I click on it, I see it's a regular live text object. And if I go to the Effect menu, I could also choose 3D Extrude and Bevel, and let's click on the Preview button. I can apply that 3D look to this text also. Here, the lighting becomes important as well. Notice that I can brighten up different parts of my text by adjusting the lighting settings. Again, if I hold down the Shift key, I can see that happen as I move this around. So notice over here, I'm getting a very, very dark shadow on my extrusion because I have a very bright light kind of shining right on the surface of this particular object. But you'll notice that the front color over here is orange, as is the extruded color as well. This is actually one of those times when you may want to explore using a stroke in a 3D effect. I'm going to click on OK here, for example, and I'm going to go ahead right now for my stroke of my object and click on this and change the color of that stroke. For example, let's say I use a dark red color. If I choose that option, you'll see that the 3D effect updates and now the extruded color is in red. This gives you an idea of what's happening when you apply a 3D effect inside of Illustrator that has a stroke. The stroke is extruded, as is the fill. We just can't really see the fill over here because the stroke is covering it. But when working inside of Illustrator, there may be times when you want your extruded color to be different than the actual face color of your 3D object. And this is certainly the way that you can achieve that. In fact, if you remember that you can actually apply multiple strokes to a single object, what would happen if you would add multiple strokes to this text object? Then you would have several layers of colors that would appear on here, which actually might be pretty cool. Something for you to mess around with and play with in your free time.